Okay, there are several extremely striking and valuable features of our world that are very well explained by theism, but are coincidences on atheism. For one, our world is very regular. There are regularities to the laws of nature, and there's regularities to the events of nature. Now, that's especially problematic because the regularity has to be complex enough to have interesting structures, but it also can't be so complex as to undermine our knowledge of induction. So there's a precarious fine tuning. Speaking of fine tuning, the laws of nature are fine tuned according to many physicists. The values of the constants that permit for the possibility of life fall within a very narrow life permitting range. Okay, but suppose life exists. Life could be unconscious. In fact, the hard problem of consciousness has troubled philosophers for years, where we don't see how anything could show or explain why consciousness exists. And why is consciousness rationally related to our bodies and our environment? Look, we touch a stove and we feel pain, and that causes us to avoid the stove in the future. But why is that? Because we can't explain consciousness from its underlying substrate, that or from the physical stuff it's related to, then it's perfectly conceivable that we touch the stove and we feel pleasure and it causes us to avoid it. And so our consciousness is coherent and structured and rationally related to our environment. Now, God is a mind of unlimited power. He would just be all knowing and he would be all good, since an all knowing being would be perfectly rational and a rational being would pursue the good. So all of these coincidences are perfectly explained by theism. But on atheism, there are a range of coincidences that are strikingly improbable and very fortunate for us that have no explanation. And so we should think that an all powerful God likely exists.
All right, okay, thank you. I'll read the timer. A couple seconds, Ritual.
Yep. I wasn't aware he was
And
going to defend an all-powerful entity. All right.
you can begin.
Okay, so I'm negating the proposition today that God exists as a fundamental, powerful, intentional being. Now, my position here is not that such a being can be proven impossible. And my burden here is just to show that the specific being described by the resolution cannot be coherently established. Now, the crucial property here is genuine intentional agency. So we're not just going to debate some mere fundamentality, because I think that can exist within an atheistic worldview. Now, I'm going to make 3 points here. First is the problem of instantiation. Genuine intentionality requires a subject. There must be something for whom purpose, reasons, or representations exist. So we need an account of what instantiates that subjectivity at the fundamental level where God resides and how it gives rise to genuine intentional agency. We can simply call it we can simply call the fundamental reality conscious, but that by itself does not establish that it is fundamentally conscious. Now, it gives us a primitive, right? It does not explain why the primitive constitutes a particular subject with intentional states or how those states ground agency. The bridge from fundamentality to genuine subjectivity and intentionality, therefore, needs to be established here. Second is the problem of ultimate authorship. Suppose I grant that this fundamental being is conscious and capable of intentional action. We still have to ask whether it is the ultimate author um, of the motivational character from which its purpose arises. If that character is brute, then it is unchosen. That being acts intentionally, but its fundamental motivational basis is simply just brutally given. If that character is chosen, then the choice must be made for some prior reason, preference, or motivational basis. But if this character is fundamental, then by that definition, there is no deeper metaphysical layer from which it can be constructed. So we face a dilemma here. Either the fundamental character is brute, or its selection depends upon something prior. If it is brute, then we need a symmetry breaker for why we can't introduce brute facts into the fine-tuning problem. But even if it's the other case, it still doesn't satisfy that this being has ultimate or self-authorship. Now, the third case is just a comparative justification. Even if an intentional fundamental being can be made coherent, coherency here is not enough. A fundamental non-intentional reality remains a competing metaphysical possibility here. So the intentional model introduces additional commitments, which is just fundamental subjectivity, consciousness, and agency. And these commitments require justification beyond merely showing that they're conceivable or they're pragmatically good to believe in. So my case here will focus on three questions mainly. What fundamentality instantiates intentionality, whether that intentional character can be self-authored, and what justifies positing the fundamental intentionality in the first place. All right.
Sorry to cut you off, but we now have 5 minutes for Mason to ask questions. As the affirmative, you can begin whenever.
Yeah, so just about your first argument. So you said, like, well, what sort of grounds its intentionality? Well, a mind is just the kind of thing that has an intentionality. So a mind just is a being that has beliefs, desires, practice, is able to reason and so on and so forth. And so just what it is to be a mind, you get intentionality. So what's the problem with that?
Well, no, that's not exactly the question I'm asking you. I'm saying that how does consciousness actually exist in this fundamental being, right? Because there can be possible answer. I think the one you gave me is you're basically saying that consciousness is a property of that being, right? If it is the case that consciousness is a property of this said being, then well, you have another dilemma here. Either that consciousness is an accidental or non-essential property, or that consciousness is an essential property. If
Yeah,
you're posing
consciousness is just so I take it that a mind is the kind of thing that has beliefs, desires, experiences, and is able to reason and so on. That's just part of what it is to be a mind. So there's no surprise why a mind would have
wait,
consciousness.
so are you saying consciousness is just identical with the being?
No, I'm saying consciousness is an essential property or characteristic of a mind. A mind is
Oh
a
yeah,
being
fine.
that has beliefs, desires, reasons,
Okay.
experiences, etc.
Yeah, if consciousness is an essential property, then
Of any mind. That's just what a mind is.
okay, then what does it mean for
Yeah.
subjectivity to be a fundamental property, and why does it involve like genuine
It
intentionality?
means that
What? Okay, yeah, like
it means that
Mhm.
mentality is not reducible. At least mentality in this particular being is not reducible to anything else. Now, and then your second argument, I think a lot of your arguments were sort of begging the question. You were saying, well, um, you know, these things you were trying to say like, well, they can't be fundamental. But my hypothesis just is there is a fundamental mind. And so that's my hypothesis. And I gave a bunch of lines of data that my hypothesis would explain. And so if we have a theory
Yep.
that explains a bunch of evidence, highly specific coincidences, then we should just accept the theory.
Oh no, well, yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm showing that your hypothesis is internally incoherent. So, it is a case that if a
But
fundamental
what's the
being like
contradiction? What are you, sorry, so one thing you said is, the first thing we said, okay, you said, well, how does it get its
Mhm.
intentionality and how does it get experiences? And I said, well, that's just what it is to be a mind. And then you said, now it seems like you're trying to say that subjectivity can't be fundamental, but you didn't make any argument for that. There's no logical
yeah,
contradiction with
yeah,
subjectivity being
when I
fundamental. And in
say
fact, a large
Mhm.
amount of philosophers of mind believe that consciousness is a fundamental feature of reality.
Yeah, when I say incoherent, I'm not saying that okay, there's a clear contradiction here. I'm saying yeah, fine, maybe it is possible, but that being
So what do you
instantiated
mean by
doesn't.
incoherent then? Wait, what do you mean
Yeah,
by
I'm just
incoherent?
saying, yeah, it can't be conceptualized given the facts we know or given our
Oh, that's
epistemic
not, that's
position.
straightforwardly true, and I can show how it can be conceptualized because there's huge
Mhm.
debate in the philosophy of mind over whether consciousness is a fundamental feature of reality. If that couldn't be conceptualized, that whole discourse among the experts in this subject would make absolutely no sense. So it can be
Well, yeah,
conceptualized. So it's a viable hypothesis.
I'm not saying that the consciousness itself isn't a property of a mind. I'm saying that if a mind is fundamental or the being that the resolution requires, then how exactly do we explain its subjectivity, right? Because
Okay, now we're
in
going somewhere
ordinary,
different. So you first you said
uh,
it can't be conceptualized. I said that's false. The reason it can be conceptualized because experts in the field have substantive discussions about these questions. If it literally just couldn't be conceptualized, none of those debates would make any sense. Now you're asking me, well, how does the mind have subjectivity? Well, I just told you subjectivity is an essential characteristic of mind. Now you might ask me, well, how is it fundamental? Well, it's a perfectly coherent hypothesis that subjectivity is fundamental, and then whether we should accept the hypothesis will turn on the evidence we have for it.
no, here's the case. Okay, so when we say mind, right? We can posit that fine, a fundamental mind does exist, and fine, it even has subjective experience. But why does that involve like it has intentions towards anything? Why can't it just
That's
be
what a
there?
mind. Hold on. A mind is a mind. Just what a mind means is the thing that has experiences and that has intentionality, beliefs, desires, etc. That's just what a mind is. So there's no
Well,
mystery about why a mind has intentionality. That's just what it
hold
is
on.
to be a mind.
Yeah, I don't think that's established. Yeah, fine, the mind can have belief or some mental states, but that doesn't straightforwardly secure intentionality towards
Hold
any
on.
other mental state.
Beliefs are intentional states. An intentional
But
state is a state that's about or directed towards something. A belief would be an example of intentionality.
wait, we're not using intention that way. Okay, intention here just means the will to do something, right? You can hold a belief, right? We can hold a belief about something, but that's not the same way, the same
Hold on,
intention I'm
you
using
said
here.
So then you were using the word intentionality. So it seems like you're using. So I don't know exactly what you mean now because I was understanding intentionality as it's understood in philosophy, and now I'm not really sure what in sense of intentionality you're talking
Okay,
So now we're gonna continue with Ridge asking questions. You have 5 minutes. Sorry.
Um, yep. All right. Um, fine. Okay, do you think that this being's motivational character is necessary in any way in the metaphysical sense?
about. Yes, I think it's metaphysically necessary that God is motivated by certain things such as the good.
That God is motivated by certain things such as good,
Yeah, such as the good. Yeah.
such as the. Okay, so are we saying good is a more fundamental being than God?
Well, goodness is a fundamental property, and God is also a fundamental being, right? So they're both fundamental things.
Hold on, I don't quite understand this. You're saying good is a property which fundamentally exists. So good is a fundamental being, but at the same time,
Goodness is
God
it's a
derives.
property, not a substance. It's so if by being you mean like a substance, it wouldn't be a
Yeah,
substance. Goodness is a
no,
property.
by being we just mean an existence.
Sure, yeah, it's a goodness is fundamental thing in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so the motivational character of God is being derived by another being.
I don't know what you mean by derived by another being. God is motivated towards by other fundamental properties like goodness.
Yeah, derived would just mean okay. So to act on anything, right? To have an intentional action, we obviously need an underlying motivational state. And you're saying this motivational state is itself motivated by this being which we call good.
That's a category mistake. Saying the motivated state is itself motivated by that's a category mistake. I'm saying
Well, that's what you said.
God is motivated by certain things like goodness, and goodness is a fundamental property.
Okay, well, I mean that's okay. You still haven't answered the question, but fine. What
No,
is the
I
argument for
directly
this
answered
good?
it.
What is the argument for this goodness existing at all? Like, what is the argument for this abstract property of goodness actually being real?
Yeah, so I mean, okay, what's the argument for goodness existing? Well, it looks like there are very plausible themes that are good. Looks like donating to charity is good. It looks like just like there are very plausible themes that are bad. It looks like torturing children for fun is bad. And I
Good in
contend
what
these
sense?
beliefs are just as plausible as any other philosophical position. And in fact, if your philosophical position has to deny the existence of goodness or badness, then that's a strike against your theory.
Strike against no, I'm not no, I don't think that okay, good donating to charity is a good thing simpliciter. I think it can be good things pertaining to something else. Fine. It's an emotionally good thing. I feel good when I donate to charity. I feel bad when I torture children. I don't see this like a simpliciter good property. You're just saying, oh, it's plausible that it's objectively
Yeah,
good.
so we start off, yeah, so what you're basically doing is you're sort of giving a meta-ethical view called expressivism, where maybe what
Yep.
goodness is, it's
But
really just like an expression of emotion. And then what
I'm
I'm
not
saying is that,
no,
and so what I'm
Mason.
saying is that like we
Yeah.
can add the existence. I have a hypothesis that says that there's a unlimited powerful mind. Okay, and I can sort of add in my hypothesis that this mind is motivated by goodness, and then we can see what would this hypothesis explain. And if it explains all of these fortuitous coincidences that your theory can't explain, then that's good a reason to believe in this robust property of goodness.
Well, no. For okay, so the fine-tuning argument kind of is presupposing the probability distribution. Do you have any access to the probability distribution of how our universe was even supposed to be? And no, I'm not
Um,
positing expressivism. I'm just saying that
I
there
don't know
are
what you mean by
believed.
that. I don't know what you mean by the fine-tuning arguments presupposing a probability distribution. How the Bayesian cosmological fine-tuning argument works is they give basically a uniform probability distribution over a space of possible constant values that are consistent with our background physical theory. So that would be like quantum field
Wait, could you
theory and
repeat
general
that?
relativity, bounded
Uh,
by the Planck scale. So it's just a
Mason,
uniform probability distribution.
Mason, repeat the first sentence he said.
Yeah, so what they do is there's a range of possible constant values that are consistent with quantum field theory and general relativity within certain
Okay.
energy limits, right? Because those physical theories are considered, so quantum field theory is an effective field theory, which means it breaks down at certain energy levels. So you take that as your finite bounds, and then you apply a uniform probability distribution over that space.
Wait, okay. Uh, are you saying there's a finite number of possible conditions or meta conditions?
No, there's not a finite. There's a finite range, not a finite number.
Well, no, there's not a finite range. There's finite range to up and
So there is a finite range. So you can see this in Luke Barnes' paper, for example. I believe it's called A Reasonable Little Question. So what you do is you have to bound the range by the Planck scale. So our physical theories break down at certain energy levels. And so basically the energy levels it breaks down at, those tell at the finite bounds. And so once you have the finite bounds for the range, you can then use a
Oh
uniform
yeah,
boundary.
yeah, I understand that, but that's just positing. Okay, we need a universe exactly like this one, right? It could just be the case that okay, there's an infinite number of meta conditions or conditions possible, and one of them just happens to
I
be
don't know
ours.
what you mean.
Um,
You guys
agree.
continue in the open discussion. 10 minutes. Continue, guys.
Okay, yeah, so I think we should get into some of my arguments because I don't know if you addressed any of them. So I think I postulated a bunch of coincidences that are very naturally explained by my theory, and I don't see how are just completely coincidences of your theory. So things like psychophysical
Yeah.
harmony, cosmological fine tuning, etc.
Well, psychophysical harmony already presupposes substance dualism. I don't even think consciousness
No, no, it
is.
doesn't. No, it doesn't. So
Well,
this is
okay.
this is actually
Do you think mental states
sure.
are different than physical states?
I believe that, but even you don't have to believe. So this is a common point, and Dr. Brian Cutter and Justin Carmen addressed this in the paper. So what psychophysical harmony does, it's compatible with physicalism. It assumes that there's an epistemic gap between the mental and the physical. And basically what that means is that it's at least conceivable that you have things like zombies and inverts and whatnot. And so then once you
No,
have that epistemic gap,
well,
you notice that
yeah,
consciousness is rationally
it could
related
be.
to physical.
Yeah, philosophical zombies could be conceivable, but there's a difference between negative possibility and positive possibility. Fine, like in an
Yeah.
ordinary sense, I can think of the zombie, but that doesn't mean that it's actually metaphysically possible.
Yeah,
And,
so this
under
is
the view
a
I
Bayesian
take,
argument. So this is a
yeah,
Bayesian argument. Bayesian
mhm.
arguments deal with something called epistemic possibility. And so what we're doing is we're talking about the epistemic possibility. So here's how it works. On physicalism, zombies would be conceivable on the standard version, right? But metaphysically impossible. Then we
Well,
notice that, hey,
yeah,
consciousness is really rationally related to the physical in a certain way. And so then that gives us really, really strong evidence for my hypothesis. And some
no,
other
here's a
theory.
yeah. I think philosophical zombies would be just as conscious as we are. I don't even take philosophical zombies to be a coherent concept. I mean, if a zombie, if a being is down to the atom identical to me without having some mental states, yeah, that's completely that's just me.
I mean, you could sort. I mean, so you're sort of giving your idiosyncratic judgments about what's conceivable. But actually, if we look into the philosophy of mind, even
No, this
physicalists,
isn't no.
so
This isn't idiosyncratic.
even physicalists would be adversarial to what I'm saying. The common view is a view called type B physicalism or a posteriori physicalism, or under which zombies would be conceivable. And so
Well,
we have very,
yeah,
very good reason to think that they're at least conceivable, even if you don't want to say they're possible, that's fine because the argument's using epistemic possibilities. And so
no,
once we
yeah,
update on
fine,
the evidence,
yeah.
we'll get
I
stronger
agree.
evidence for theism.
I agree that these zombies are possible, but I think you're not understanding what these zombies actually are.
No, no,
Under the view
it's possible.
under the view I take, yeah, under the view I take, these zombies are just conscious beings, right? I'm working under like a fictionalist or an illusionist framework, so I don't think how it's
Yeah,
defeated.
and so I'm saying that illusionism is wrong. Why is illusionism wrong? Because even physicalists, so the best version of, or well, let's just say like the versions of physicalism, even most physicalists would be adversarial, except are versions where zombies would be conceivable. And so I'm just saying we have extremely strong evidence against illusionism, and also nearly all of philosophy, I think, supports the judgment that there's an epistemic gap between the mental and the physical. For example, why is there a problem of other minds? If zombies weren't even conceivable, it would make absolutely no sense that we feel like we can't rule out with certainty that other people aren't conscious. And so I think
Is
your view, not only is it implausible independently, but it leads to this radical skepticism of all of philosophy, which would be self-defeating on your own position because your position is a philosophical position.
No, I think that's just a misunderstanding what illusionism is. We're not saying that okay, mental states literally do not exist. We're saying mental states are identical to physical states. They're reducible to physical states, right? So
No,
you
that's
can
not
you
what
can
illusionism. No, that's not that. So you don't know what illusionism is. The view that phenomenal consciousness, not that it's reducible to the physical. Illusionism is the view that phenomenal consciousness does not exist. For reference, look at Keith Frankish's paper, "Illusionism as a Theory of Consciousness." It's
that's
like
a
the
yeah
bog standard
yeah
definition of illusionism.
yes that's a view I'm taking here. The Dennett
Yeah, but
account
you
of
just said
illusionism.
but you just contradicted yourself. You just said earlier
No,
that no, I'm not saying they don't
the
exist.
Dennett
I'm saying they're reducible to the
yeah
physical.
yeah the Dennett account of
Now I'm saying no,
the
illusionism
Dennett
is the view that they don't exist.
the Dennett account of illusionism literally just says that phenomenal experiences are illusions, right? So we're not
They
outright
don't
denying that they
exist. Yeah, they don't exist.
Yeah, no, okay, calling them an illusion is different from completely eliminating them.
No, no,
Eliminativism is completely different here.
Rigel,
We're
I'm
uh
sorry. I'm sorry I have to say this, but you just don't understand the view. This is very standard philosophy of mine. I don't know what to tell you. I just don't
yeah,
know
I
what
think
else to tell
yeah,
you.
I understand this is standard philosophy of mine, and I think you're the one here who's not in the understanding here. All I'm
Okay,
saying is
sure.
that yeah,
Let's move
calling
on.
it an illusion.
Okay.
No,
I'll do
we
take
can't
last
move
word on
on
this.
because this is very important to the debate. So
Yeah,
calling
take
it
the
an
last word on
illusion
this, and
isn't.
then
Say that again.
take the last word on this, and then we can move on.
Take the what? Oh,
I
take the
said
last word. Yeah,
take the
yeah.
last
So
word on this point, then we can move on.
yeah, I don't even think that mental states exist independently. Fine, we can call them illusions. So phenomena is just like reducible to physical states and physical substrates. And in this view, we can refer to like ad populum fallacy and say, oh, a lot of philosophers think this way, but that doesn't prove it's like truth happens, right? Um, so yeah, that doesn't really get your argument anywhere. We don't even know that minds can be non-physical.
Okay. Yeah. So okay, and I've said what I want to say about that. So so I mentioned some other really fortuitous coincidences. So for example, I mentioned cosmological fine tuning, and I also mentioned the fact that our universe is extremely regular, but it's complex enough to have interesting structures, but it's not so complex as to undermine our ability to make inductive inferences. And so now my theory has very natural explanations of this. Those are very valuable features of reality. It's very valuable that we can sort of learn about the world and do induction. It's very valuable
Yes,
that life exists. So what's the
yes.
explanation on your theory?
Yeah, the explanation is that if we have no epistemic access to the probability distribution, so your argument itself is inherently question begging. You're
No,
saying,
we
okay, the
do.
probability. Okay, what is the probability distribution?
We're using a uniform probability distribution. You use the uniform. We do this all the time. If you have no reason to favor one outcome over another, then you do this. You treat them as equally likely. This is used throughout all of science, and
Wait,
all of the sciences
no,
use something like uniform probability
no,
distributions.
the probability distribution pertaining to the uniformity of nature, right? There could be, it is
Oh,
possible that
uniformity of nature. Okay, gotcha.
yeah, it is possible that the probability space of how universes could be are like okay, if you have infinite meta conditions and an infinite number of those meta conditions lead to a uniformity of nature universe, and
Well,
an infinite would
it's
lead
not
to.
just so it's two things, right? So it's like our universe is regular,
Mhm.
but it's also so our universe has regularities, but it's
Yep.
complex enough to have interesting structures like life.
That's redundant.
But it's not as complex so as to undermine induction. So you can
Yes, that's
imagine the
redundant.
universe being very complex to undermine. And so I'm saying there's this double confluence of two independent factors that are sort of
Yes,
harmoniously obtaining.
I
And I
understand.
say like
I
that's
understand.
very naturally explained on my theory because that's a very valuable feature of the world. However,
I understand. Yeah.
you don't have any explanation for why these two coincident factors sort of come line up to one another.
Oh, I actually do. Yeah, that's the addition of those properties you gave is completely redundant. Again, this just falls into a question begging
No, no,
argument.
it's not
We don't.
redundant. No, that's wrong. It's not redundant. So look, there are two. So here's the one thing that's possible. It could be that we have complex regularities and structures, but we
Yep.
can't trust induction. So because it might
Yes.
be where like cars pop into existence randomly,
Yes.
but there's still regularity in other areas. So I'm saying like it has
Hmm.
to be complex enough for that, but it can't be too
Yeah.
complex to undermine induction.
Yeah, yeah. Again, that's redundant. Again, this goes back to the question begging argument. I'll tell you the reason why it's redundant. So the
Sorry, what's
probability
this?
space. Yeah, the probability space we have is we have an infinite number of meta conditions, and this infinite number of meta conditions produce another infinite number of conditions for a possible universe. So if there is an infinite number of meta conditions and infinite number of conditions, and we have no epistemic access to probability space, we can't just say, oh, it just seems improbable that this is like very rare and it could only be naturally explained in the God
What?
hypothesis.
Yeah, none of that was, and you didn't at all explain how it was redundant. So first, I'm saying these are conceptually independent. Here's what I mean when they're not redundant. They're conceptually independent in the sense that it's perfectly coherent that one obtained, not the other. Okay, so it could have been that we
No,
have
when I say
regularity,
redundant, I don't mean
but still, it could have been that we have
yeah.
regularity, but we aren't able to trust induction. And so I'm saying
Yeah,
theism
fine,
explains
fine,
that
fine.
very naturally.
I agree. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
so then you
understand that
agree that
point.
yeah,
But
but
when I
then
say
not just to say they're not redundant. You earlier you
no,
were
they
saying
are
they're
still
redundant, now you're
redundant.
saying they're not
No,
redundant.
the point here why they're redundant is that both of them fall into the same problem. You still haven't answered the same problem. What is the epistemic access to the probability distribution of possible universes?
I, hold on, I don't know. So look, I don't know what
Yeah.
you're saying when you say they fall into the same when I say they're not redundant, I'm saying they're conceptually independent. Okay, now you're asking a question. Well, what is the access to the probability distribution? Okay, well, I don't think you always need to have a formal probability distribution for every
Well, you
argument.
do.
It's great when you
Well,
have
no.
that,
Okay.
but you can also perfectly. So, for example, I don't have a formal. If I saw a message written on the beach, somebody said like "hello" written on the beach. I don't have a formal probability distribution, but I think we can infer naturally that agents wrote the message as opposed to it being etched into the sand by the waves.
Well, no, you actually do have a formal probability distribution. Given the laws of our universe, it is massively improbable that this sign would just pop up out of nowhere, right? And when I say redundant, all I'm
That's what a
saying
formal
that it's
probability.
dialectically.
Sorry to interrupt, but now we'll have 2-minute closers, starting with the affirmative. Yeah, go ahead, Mason.
Oh yeah, good. So what Rizzo just said, oh, it's very improbable. That is not a formal probability distribution. That is relying on intuitions about what's improbable. So there was no like mathematically specified distribution. And so I just want to sort of summarize all the arguments. So I made an argument that look, there's a bunch of these coincidences, cosmological fine tuning, regularity that's complex enough to have interesting stuff, um, but not enough to undermine induction. The existence of consciousness and also the existence of psychophysical harmony, a rational relationship between consciousness and the physical world. And now, I don't think there was any good objection to any of these arguments. Let's talk about cosmological fine tuning. Well, there's some questions about like how we get the probabilities, and I think I explained everything. I didn't hear a further objection. Let's talk about the sort of just complex enough argument. Well, I mean, Rigel said, well, how do you get the probability distribution? But we don't actually always need a formal probability distribution. We make inferences all the time without that. Okay, what about psychophysical harmony? Well, Rigel said he brought up illusionism, but unfortunately, Rigel didn't even understand what illusionism was. And you can just look up what illusionism is from the work of people like Keith Frankish, and you can just see that his understanding was actually reductive physicalism, and it just contradicts the very thesis of illusionism. And so I just, and then when it comes to Rigel's arguments, I think I responded to them all pretty straightforwardly. I explained, well, a mind by definition has these kinds of properties of intentionality and so on and so forth. And whether we should accept the hypothesis of fundamental intentionality and fundamental subjectivity and whatever just depends on the evidence we have. And I gave a lot of evidence for it. And then, finally, I showed that there's no conceptual incoherence because that would render basically a bunch of philosophical debates that have been happening for thousands of years completely unintelligible. And so we can at least treat this as a conceptual possibility.
All right, okay, thank you. Rachel, you can start whatever. Virgil?
Oh wait, could you restart the timer?
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, you can begin whenever.
All right. So at the start, I started with three of my main positive arguments. And basically the conclusion of all those positive arguments was that such a being, or which the resolution requires, is non-conceptualizable. So given our epistemic position, we can't even conceptualize such a being. Now, saying that, okay, we have debates about the being doesn't automatically mean, okay, the right kind of being is being conceptualized. We can have the debate about the classical theistic being or a deistic being, right? But that doesn't mean that the being which the resolution, the prompt of today's debate has is conceptualizable. Now, the main argument here was the authorship regress. We're basically saying that the motivational character of this fundamental being has to either be chosen by something prior to the being, which is not conceptualizable because the being itself is metaphysically fundamental, or that the motivational character is brute. Again, if you're introducing brute facts in this being's motivation character, then why not explain the universe as a brute fact? Now, the arguments that Mason here gave, the fine-tuning arguments, I think they're okay. Fine, there can be some arguments here made that which are fine, but which don't presuppose or question back. But the arguments he was making was question begging. He was saying that, okay, yeah, it just seems that these are massively massively improbable under atheism, but probable under theism. Well, no, we don't have. Well, we know the epistemic foundations we have here is that we know there are an infinite number of meta conditions and conditions. So if there are an infinite number, how could we possibly call one more probable than the other? Right? For all we know, it's a 1/1. Infinity over infinity. This renders every probability distribution just completely nonsense. So we can't even make this free fine-tuning argument without begging the question that one is more probable than the other. And yeah, I think Mason is extremely educated on this. And about the illusionism, I was specifically referring to Dennett's account of illusionism. That's about it.
All right. Okay. Thank you. So that's time, and so if we could have Dr. Baker Hitch give his verdict on who he thought won and any feedback for the competitors. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so yes, it seems to me that Mason won the debate. Yeah, so I mean, I think both of you did well, and yeah, I think you managed to stick pretty closely to a number of important considerations. I would say that I think Mason laid out four pretty, widely discussed arguments in contemporary philosophy of religion, clearly understood them very well, it framed them in a sort of standard Bayesian confirmation framework. And I think that I would have to agree that none of those four arguments was significantly undermined. I think we potentially went down a bit of a rabbit trail with the illusionism thing because, I mean, as was pointed out, the psychophysical harmony argument doesn't rely on any particular position within the philosophy of mind. I mean, Crummett and Cutter are quite clear about that it works with physicalism. So I think, to be honest, we didn't really need to go down that avenue. Yeah, so I think that Rigel's arguments for thinking that a fundamental intentional mind is inconceivable or incoherent were quite underdeveloped, and I think that it probably would have been better to attack the idea that theism has greater explanatory power with respect to the data rather than what I thought were some rather underdeveloped attempts to sort of undermine the coherence of theism, full stop. So yeah, that would be my verdict.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so that wraps up the whole tournament. Thank you, Dr. Baker Hitch. So Mason's the winner of the tournament. Since this is like the end, I mean, Dr. Baker Hitch, if you want to answer any questions or if or we could wrap it up now. It's up to you.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to stay around for a few more minutes.
So if any of the competitors have any questions or anybody in the audience, you can come up a couple minutes for questions and we'll send them off.
And thanks for judging and coming here, Dr. Hitch. I was wondering if there were any theodicies you liked, or like what your favorite theodicy was.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think so I quite like so I think that soul-making theodicies get maybe an unfairly hard time sometimes, and I think that the version that Hick gave already did have a certain nuance that often gets overlooked. So like the standard objection to soul-making theodicies is like, well, what about all of these cases where the person's soul doesn't grow as a result? But Hick already kind of addressed that, and in a way that I think gets ignored often, where he says that in effect, like, we're not just talking about soul making at the individual level. We have to think about an entire arena or system that could be the kind of place in which souls get made. And for all we know, there's just no way to configure such a system in such a way that there won't be a good deal of cases where at least within a person's earthly lifetime, they come out sort of net negative, as it were, or their character is harmed as a result. And also that, as he puts it, like dysteleological suffering, like suffering where we can't readily see the soul building purpose of it. He suggested that actually may be necessary for a soul making arena to work properly. Otherwise, if suffering always seems kind of readily attributable to soul building purposes, maybe that would actually undermine the ability to form certain virtues like compassion, sympathy, and so yeah. I mean, I also like Eleanor Stump. I see Stump's theodicy as being somewhat in that same tradition, actually, with obviously with slightly different emphases. Yeah.
That's cool. And also, I was wondering if you had any thoughts on, I guess what's called the omission theodicy, which I guess is fairly recent from
Yeah,
Dr.
I
Brian
haven't
Cutter.
read that. Yeah, that's right. So that's Brian Cutter, isn't it? And I have that sitting on my computer, and I haven't read it yet. Yeah, I'll have to get back to you on that when I have read it.
All right, well, sounds good. Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, thank you. And then I think we have one other person in the
Yep. Hello. Yep.
Uh,
So I was wondering what you thought of the argument from, I don't know if you've heard it before, but the argument, the fine-tuning argument, uh but from the probability of like a simulated reality. Have you heard of it before?
um, no, I mean, say a little bit more, and I might, not on the face of it from what you've just said.
Right, right. So basically it says that given that it's possible for people to make an artificial reality, like some kind of simulation,
Hmm.
in be it through a computer or whatnot,
Yeah.
and it's possible for some like alien race to have already done this, and it's entirely possible that we live in a simulated reality, and
Hmm.
that simulated reality uh would be designed. So technically, it would be sort of an argument for a design universe by virtue of the probability that um it's just entirely probable. It's very probable that there's like multiple simulated. We live in like an entire chain of multiple simulated realities.
This isn't like Nick Bostrom's. So I know Nick Bostrom had argued, that we probably live in a simulation.